Good. I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight for the release of This Conversation is Being Recorded by Hannah Kezema, an absolutely incredible collection of documentary poetics and mixed media art. I am here to introduce our feature for tonight, Hannah herself. So I'm going to just, no shenanigans, get right into it, read her bio really quick, and get her up here for you. Hannah Kezema is an artist who works across mediums. She earned a BA from the New School and an MFA from Naropa University's Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. She's the author of the chapbook 3, Tea and Tattered Pages 2017, and now the author of This Conversation is Being Recorded by Game Over Books. And her work can be found in Black Sun Lit, Grimoire, New Life Quarterly, Full Stop, Spiral Orb, and other places. She was the 2018 Artelli's Resident of Entertext program in Finland, and she is currently the co-editor of Moving Parts Press, broadside series of Latinx and Chicanx poetry in collaboration with Felicia Rice and Angel Dominguez. She lives in the Santa Cruz Mountains by the sea, among the redwoods and the wildflowers. All right, folks, we're going to get her up here. Please give a warm welcome to Hannah Kezema. All right, Hannah, I'm going to let you take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in on this Tuesday night. I know the beginning of the week is not an easy time to be on Zoom, so I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to be bringing this book into the world. Hopefully it won't disappear on the screen. It's really been a labor of love, as I've been saying. And I can't believe that I've been working on this for so long. We have this beautiful cover by Dave Mahan, which is also the background, as you see, and amazing blurbs from Anne Waldman, Tatiana Lubovisky Acosta, Jillian Chapman, Felicia Rice, and Brenda Ijima, who are some of my favorite writer, artist people in life. So I'm eternally grateful for their words on this book. I've been working on this since about 2017, after having started working in the insurance fraud industry for a couple of years. It's not something I ever thought that I would be doing, and I'm still doing it to this day, if you can believe it or not. But I entered the industry as an editor, and over the years, I've worn numerous hats, whether it's being a manager or an investigator in the field, interviewing people, doing canvassing and cold calls and phone interviews and all of that kind of stuff, to just being an editor and working with the reports that other investigators give me. And I started writing about cases, I think, because there were some that just wouldn't leave my head. And, you know, in this business, you're taught to be really unbiased and not have opinions about things. And it can be very cold in that way, approaching very difficult subject matter. And writing about the cases was actually helping me to deal with that. I didn't really have anyone I could vent to about it. And so it kind of became a therapeutic way of dealing with difficult subject content, you know, people who have died at work, people who have been harassed or attacked or assaulted, or all kinds of things. They take a toll. And so I continued working on it, not really knowing it would become a book, but I kept going at it. And then Game Over Books took a chance on this and really encouraged me to get weird with it and lean into my practice as a hybrid artist. And so these are not just poems, but also there's a visual element. I have erasures of case documents, case referrals, which are the instructions that we get when we're assigned a case, and like the deadline and all of those things. And then, you know, my interview notes as well. I went through many iterations of what those erasures would be, but actually, in the very final stages of working on the book, I started painting the erasures and using earthly elements like flowers from my garden and yard and dirt and sand, and more on the flowers later. And I will explain the importance, but what came out of that are, I'm going to try to show you if it works, these erasures. And some of them are just paint, while some of them have flowers. Zoom doesn't want me to show them to you very well, but they're there. And we've got different types of poems in this. So there are poems about the cases themselves. There are question poems that don't have titles, but they're just sequences of questions that I have to actually ask people in interviews, and also questions that I chose to ask myself. There are Find the Fraud poems that repeat throughout, and those are the ones that kind of demarcate like the rules of insurance fraud as they are, at least in the state of California. And yeah, and some poems. And I think without further ado, I start reading from this. And thank you so much again for tuning in. My heart is really full right now, and I'm having a lot of feelings and nerves, but I'm mostly just very happy and excited to be sharing this with you all. So thank you. Do you understand this conversation is being recorded? Is it being recorded with your consent? Spell your full name, birth date, social security number, driver's license number. Are you right or left-handed? Do you speak any other languages? Do you have any nicknames or aliases? Where do you live? Where did you work before this? Any concurrent employment? When were you hired? What are your job duties? Schedule? Wage? Tell me about your injury. What was the date and time of the accident? What were you doing? Were there any witnesses? Did you report the injury? Did you seek medical treatment? How was the claim initiated? Tell me, what makes your pain worse? What makes it go away? The referral. I remember what they say, not a face. I scroll through the referral, a beveled mirror of circumstance, searching for numbers, names, and dates, fingering the where and the when, the who and the what part of the body. What part of the body or mind ails? Who gets to tell the story? How many versions live in a story? How do we tread around each utterance? Does what we already know fit into the frame? Or does it jut out like an anguished teen? What's between the details? The flesh, muscle, and bone. Underneath the address and birth date, the viral outbreak, the gas fire. Did they survive it? Could they? The witness is a fractal of the fact, a window in time. Collect the angles and hinge, a narrative into being. Polish the edges clean. Maybe you see yourself again. Find the fraud. Insurance fraud is a crime of specific intent. The alleged loss must be proven valid. Fraudulent claims cost the US billions of dollars every year. Compensability for insurance claims is determined by numerous factors. In other words, ask as many questions as it takes to find the lie, because everyone is guilty until proven innocent. The factory worker. She would always complain, and sometimes the complaints were warranted, sometimes not. She complained about her boss, about the acting supervisor who told her to close her eyes at the assembly line. She closed her eyes at the assembly line, and he kissed her on the mouth. But the controller, who is a man, could not understand why she would close her eyes when the machines are running. The machines are running, and she couldn't say why, and they couldn't fire him because he knew the job inside and out. They couldn't fire him because he was one of the best ones. So some other poems that I have in here that I didn't mention are about certain movie references and books that got me interested in noir and true crime, and in the case of this next poem, my lifelong dream of becoming a spy. Harriet the Spy was one of my all-time favorite movies as a child. I too had a small private notepad with scribbled notes about my family. When Harriet was drenched in blue paint, I was reassured even spies have bullies. At one point, convinced I was adopted, I launched a full-scale investigation with my first grade friend, a professed witch. I wanted so desperately a dumbwaiter to hide in. All I had was New England. The airport waiter. The claimant killed a wasp during our interview. The wasp entered the coffee shop, landed behind my left ear. Instinctively, I grabbed it, thinking it a flower, throwing it back into the air absently. He kept complaining of his job very calmly, and when the wasp returned, he rolled up a document and struck. The wasp fell to the ground, writhing. He told me to step on it. I couldn't. So he stepped on the wasp until it stopped moving. When it was all over, the barista gave me the bathroom code. I shut the door behind me before the man outside, who ignored my "no, sorry," could follow. I shut the door to the bathroom stall and slid down to the sudden blood that had seeped when I forgot my own nakedness. Building rapport. In the field, I never want to be attractive, only well-groomed. I wear my glasses and am usually long-sleeved. Sometimes I purposefully expose a tattoo to build rapport. Sometimes I speak lower and slower to make you more comfortable. the social worker. He was diagnosed young. That's what led him to this work. He's managing, but a little like glass. Positive is a cruel word for the afflicted. The panic attack was in question, despite what life does. And he loves who he loves. Lost his breath in the whitewashed office. After the director's lofty demands, words they sink. What is legitimate when your own body protests? What is work without a little heartbreak? Find the fraud. A claimant who is at fault for a loss may still be eligible for a settlement. A claimant whose claims have no evidentiary support may still be accepted. A claimant who is seriously injured may not be eligible for a settlement. A claimant who did not comply with the process may have their claim denied. If someone dies at their job during their lunch break, their family may not be compensated. If someone dies while driving their car to work, their family will not be compensated. Hope everybody's doing okay. Off the record. I'm supposed to investigate a global pandemic. I call everyone, the calls they ring until the end of time. I call everyone, the calls they answer tremble like an earthquake. I call everyone, the calls they answer are tired and 2 months late on rent. I ask myself, why should I call anyone now with a heartbeat? A young single mother asked if I was still recording. I assured her no. She said years ago she was robbed at gunpoint, at work, shot 5 times. A bullet still lives in her spine. She wants her sons to know she's strong and has worked since the age of 12. The state denied her disability because she was still able to hold her baby. And yet, an employee who slips in the walk-in without cracking a single egg can file a claim. So this next poem is a different type of erasure, and the only one like it in the whole book, a more traditional erasure, if you will. But it is an erasure of a referral we were given for a COVID case. And needless to say, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were inundated with cases of people getting COVID at work and filing workers' comp. And most of them were, of course, legitimate, as you can imagine. And in the beginning, a lot of the instructions were a little bit crazy, in my opinion. So I made an erasure out of one of them, and it's called Contact. Contact the accident. If you do not make contact, Please immediately knock, contact, consent to what happened. If they say no, we will totally arrive. No one is neighboring if they have him. If you contact someone, the subject does not live. Inquire if they knew. Please wear a mask and maintain social distance if possible. If you do not speak, call. Before leaving, make in-person contact. Please, you are not limited. Still getting used to navigating this thing. Who are you when you wake up in the morning? How often do you look up at the sky? Do you remember falling off your bike as a child? How the blood trickled down your leg? The sound of your grandmother's voice at dusk? Can you remember being small enough to be held? The scent of fresh mint leaves in summer? What is the gravity of your yearning? Do you ever stand still? So something I meant to mention at the beginning of the reading is that an unexpected part of this process of writing this book was actually starting my first garden last spring. It was something I'd always been resistant to. It seemed daunting to me, even though I live in such a beautiful place where there's flora and fauna everywhere. But needless to say, my gardening practice became a type of healing for me and a way of leaving the capitalist regime and sticking my hands in the dirt and listening to the birds and watching the bees and the butterflies and watching things grow. And so nature found a way in this book in a very unexpected way. So the name of this poem is Building a Garden in the Apocalypse, and it's the longest poem in the book. I used to wake with a tongue of testimony. Now I dream of the moist seeds nestled in their bed, slowly reaching for the warm light. The impossibility of weather and knowing who's been fed. I used to believe in the power of control. That's a lie. I still cling white-knuckled to the gesture of believing. All that's unhealed in me cannot wait. The questions will be my own. The case must close. The progress shall reveal itself. The emergence of green, it makes me right. The death toll rises. Business is good. I used to close this door, free fall into the absence. But the air is unforgettable. Those who cannot conceive debate the embryo, while bullets riddle classrooms and grocery stores and movie theaters and mosques and what makes a life. The sea level rises. Wars rage on, pillaging the earth for oil. I used to be sickened by mothering. That's a lie. I still fear becoming all the water. This slippery self, lost in the other. No, My body will not be a house, but my hands will sew and patiently wait. Fists may unclench one day. The wet soil brings me back to something before any need for a record. The living imprint. The worms burrow and feed, and I have new words. Deadhead, overwinter, till, blight. The hummingbird vibrates by my head. This is true listening. Today, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. I check on the ladybug eggs, clinging to the rose leaves, precarious in the wind. I delete the period application from my phone. I track my blood with a pen. How fitting. I thought somehow we'd have autonomy. That's a lie. What cruelty. To burden us all unmothered by the state, make us mothers smothered, mothering more wounds. Mother is a glittery dress hung up. Mother cuts through time. Mother is impossible like the weather. The marigolds die and return to the soil. The cabbage moth larvae feast on the brassica. All my sweat becomes holes, holes in the green. All my blood comes from my mother, then pours itself back into soil. I'm tired of the hard facts. The truth is, I never knew how to live in this world. Was I the fraud? The night I painted salvia on the form, I dreamt it all fell apart. I watched the box break from the window after the landlord called. The tree workers cut the sequoia's heavy arms, which fell with abandon, beheading the purple cauliflower. It didn't catch the way it should. The limb must be tied to slow the descent. The rope must be secure with one man at the bottom, one holding it while harnessed in the air. The job tells you things, like how to do everyone else's job, how to not do a job, how to not lie. I went outside and painted again. And this will be the last one. Thank you for tuning in. Reporting from the field. Evidence suggests that the honey-scented peach alyssum germinated, and the tiny white spiders cast a gossamer over the barreled herbs. The ladybug rests on the cucumber leaf. Its tendril grips the cage. Bees caress the lavender and oregano flowers. The neighbors' hens cluck in the yard. The flies hum like an itch, and the box elder bugs have reclaimed all the dirt and air of this microclimate. The sooty-winged butterfly hovers, returns to the periwinkled scabiosa, a flying magnet. The earwigs clog the hose's small mouths. The caterpillar dangles from its silvery spool in the morning light. I'm getting closer to knowing myself. Thank you.
Hannah Kezema, everybody. My.
It's so weird not to hear you guys, but to see you. But
It is a little different. But no, believe
but also
me,
lovely.
some love in the chat. No, though, Hannah, thank you so much. That truly was a wonderful reading, and also just like a lot to absorb today.
Lots of
Very
information.
relevant. But folks, for all of you that might not know, we're going to do a little Q&A with the author right now. So I have some questions that I've written out to ask Hannah, but I encourage anyone in the chat to please forward questions that you might have. I would love to ask them. I like it to be more than just my own voice asking these questions. So if you have anything, please throw it in the chat. I'll try to get to as many questions as possible. But with that, I want to jump in a little bit here and kind of ask you to talk a bit about what really drew you to this style of documentary poetics, and maybe talk a little bit about, because there are some interviews and things that we didn't even get to for some of the poems in the book. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about, why you picked some of the interviews or letters or documentation that you did to help create this book.
Yeah. So, that's a loaded question. I think, as I said, I was inclined to write about the poems that affected me emotionally the most. But I realized I didn't want to write about them in the way that I was writing them like for my job. Like I didn't want it. I wanted it to be a departure from this really like mundane legal way of writing that's not very creative at all. And I wanted it to be in my voice at the same time that I wanted to do justice to my subjects. I didn't want it to feel exploitative in any way, or like I was coming at it from a different perspective than I was, because I wasn't allowed to be empathetic towards my subjects in my job, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the poems were my way of like approaching it as a human would, instead of as an investigator or editor would, humanizing their experience that is like way more common than you would think it was. Like there's literally an industry thriving off of people getting hurt or killed or psychologically damaged at work. And granted, it's not always legitimate. Obviously, that's why it's an industry, but so much of it is like people just not understanding the process and
finding the way to make it illegitimate, like you said, like ask
like they didn't like report it to like the right higher up at the right time, or they didn't give the right date in their paperwork, or they are an extremely economically disadvantaged person that needs help and they don't know any other way to get it, and so I had a lot of moments where I was like, I don't feel good about only showing one side of this story, and so with the poems I felt like it was an opportunity for me to kind of hone in on these little like glimpses of humanity within these cases and the things that tugged at my heart so much. And I don't know, it was just kind of my way of like honoring their story in a very private way. Of course, there are no names in this book, and all of the names that were in there have been redacted. But I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if it did. I feel like I kind of meandered a little bit.
I love a little meander. Walk me down your little memory lane.
Started somewhere
and we always make it to where we gotta go.
That's what counts.
That's what conversations with good friends work, right? Isn't that how that's supposed to be? Like to think so. Hold on. I think we got
some comments in here.
So
hey, Brent.
Powerful poems, very self-possessed, taking on the wounded human soul that pervades so much of our daily life. It has been, I think,
Mm.
9 long years since we last saw each other at the Kerouac School. I am just curious how putting this book out has affected your work life, if at all. Is it harder to go to work having really dug into this material, or is it easier in the sense of it all being exercised? I think that's a great question.
Oh no, are any of my colleagues in here? Okay,
But
no,
I mean,
I
we
don't
could
think
ban
so.
them. No, I'm just kidding.
Um, kick them out.
Kick 'em
No.
out.
Um, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't say that this definitely has affected my job. Um, and definitely there was a time there where, like, towards the end of working on this draft, I was getting up every single morning really early to work on the book and then to do my job, and then sometimes work on the book after, and then it was like that every single day for a long time. Um, and I noticed a couple things. Firstly, I felt weirdly liberated to be, like, deliberately taking the time to work on my book, using that energy for my own creative pursuits before entering my workday, so that I wasn't using all my energy for my job anymore. Um, and so obviously a lot came up with like work life balance. How do you write a book while having a full-time job, but also um continuing to do this type of work while also being very scrutinizing about it can be hard, definitely. And thankfully, I'm no longer in the field working as an investigator. That isn't something I've done for like a little while now. So I'm just editing other people's reports, and it's easier for me to kind of remove myself in that way a little
Yeah.
bit. But of course, inevitably, I still get cases now, like even after writing this, of course, I still get cases that I'm like, man, this is messed up. Like I'm on this person's side. I'm not on the insurance company's side, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. No,
Um,
I don't envy that.
yeah, but thankfully those moments are a little fewer and far between, and actually um the COVID cases are not as crazy as you would think they are anymore. And I don't know what that means, if people have just given up or because they're definitely still getting COVID at work, um but yeah. That's my long-winded answer. It's
Great.
not easy, but it is possible to write about your job and keep doing it, but maybe not forever.
Great question, Brent. Thank you. So going off a little bit, so you showed a few of them today, even though your big cover in the background maybe didn't want to show all the erasures, but you got to show some of the erasures today, and I did want to ask, what was your painting process throughout creating these erasures, and yeah, how did these go on to influence the structure of your collection?
Hmm. Um, so as I said, it went through a few iterations because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted the visuals to be, how I wanted to execute the erasures. Um, and I wanted it to be different. I didn't want it to be like any other erasure or cut up you had seen before. And I think I started with like very rudimentary supplies like crayons, colored pencils, markers, like really working my way up and experimenting with printing different types of documents and seeing whether or not is this a good document for me to use like a sentence from and sort of perform surgery on. And it's so funny because the actual writing of this book took me 6 years altogether, but the paintings themselves, I probably finished in like the very last weeks of working on the manuscript, which is not how I work at all. um, and maybe that had something to do with the deadline a little bit. I don't know, but I got into this zone of painting over these documents so that they became completely unrecognizable. That was really the idea, was not only do I want this to look like you would never know it was a legal document,
Mhm.
but it's also interesting on its own and can speak for itself in a minimal way, like with less words, like it's a more concentrated version of the thing. It's kind of like boiling the document down to its essence. That's how I
Yeah.
was thinking about it. And I think with the poems, I felt they were good kind of punctuation marks, um, because there is so much material in the book, not just, you know, the poems, but like the content of the poems. It can be heavy and dark, um and what about the life that seeps through between, you know? I really wanted the documents to be brought to life, and I think that's where the colors of the paint and the flowers from my garden and the dirt and sand came from, because it wasn't enough for it to just be paper. I wanted it to be a whole other form. And I'd like to think that they speak to the poems as well, especially the way that Josh formatted this book, which, by the way, Josh Savory is amazing and has the patience of a saint.
No, he's all right.
Um,
I don't know.
and we've had
Oh,
many emails and meetings, um, and I couldn't have been happier actually with the way that the visuals look next to the poems, because I've noticed some unexpected like resonances there. Like with the Harriet the Spy poem, are the words blue paint, and then the image that's next to it is the painted blue, um swirly kind of ocean vibe erasure that I have. So yeah.
absolutely. Actually, something that came to mind is just, as you were talking about and kind of riffing on trying to grow something new or trying to create something new from these things. And I was like, after an area, whether it's like a wildfire or it's been bulldozed because of capitalism or whatever it is, but the idea of like, yes, that life being able to still grow despite all of this hardship or this pain, or in my mind, what the word that kept coming to mind was trash.
Yeah.
Like having all this garbage to try and sift through, right? All this like
Yeah.
industry garbage to be able to grow something new from that, I think is an incredible thing. We do have a couple questions that came in through the chat here, but I'm gonna
Mm.
hop to those. But first, since we were talking a little bit about formatting, I did want to ask, there are so many interesting choices throughout the book where you were using footnotes or bits of ransom letters, survey questions, obviously the erasures are in there too, but I'm just curious, in what ways did the documentation within these case files influence your overall formatting and structure of your poems going throughout the book?
Mm. Oh, I'm glad you brought those up, because there are so many different types of poems that I knew I would miss a couple of in there. Um, but the footnotes were a really unexpected thing that happened. Like, initially I just wanted to be good about citing my sources and all of that. And then I noticed something was happening with some of the poems where, um like, I kind of needed to leave the poem but stay on the page. And so what happened is that some of the poems have footnotes and the footnotes themselves correspond to other poems or to other lines, and it's all part of the poem, but it's kind of like my own, like signifying my own voice versus the voice of the work. And the best example I can think of that is the Red Flags poem, where it's a list of the, the biggest red flags that you see from claimants, people who file claims, like they reported it late or they were only working there for a certain amount of weeks or whatever. But then in the footnote, it lists my own red flags on a personal level. And so the footnotes gave me an opportunity to like play with those voices and have the freedom to step out of that voice when I wanted. And in terms of the other things you mentioned, like ransom notes, another unexpected part of the book was just these nods to other like true crime books. And um the ransom note, initially I tried to recreate myself, but it didn't go very well, and Josh had the brilliant idea of just having the actual ransom note. And the ransom note I'm referring to is actually from um the Black Dahlia murderer. um but I always have been fascinated by ransom notes themselves because of that cut up quality that they have with different type and collage, and it kind of just lent itself to like what was already going on with the book. And so that naturally made its way in there. um there was another thing you mentioned too. What was it?
I just mentioned some of like that you put in those various questions that you might find on some
Yeah.
information, right? Like as you're gathering information from an interviewee or
Right, right. The question poems, that's actually a good point. The question poems you can't see, but they have lines after each question, so there is the option for the reader to answer the question if they want, and I wanted that to be an open-ended thing,
yeah,
you know, however you want to interpret it. But I felt like it was important because this book is about interviewing people. And I wanted there to also be that conversation between author and reader, and even reader and reader.
absolutely. No, I that was one thing in my mind. I was like, yeah, I'm excited to see if people actually like write in.
Right. Like
Right.
I wonder if they will. I want to
I don't
see it.
I think they will. I think we got
Please write in my book and send me pictures of it.
so we do have a couple questions in the chat, so I want to pop over to those. We have one from Angel, we have one from Felicia. So Angel asks, what did gardening teach you about writing and vice versa?
Oh, it's such a good question. Patience, probably. I'm an extremely impatient person and a perfectionist to a fault. And learning to garden just kind of threw that all out the window because I realized, you can only control so many things. You can't control the weather. You can't control squirrels and deer eating your vegetables. You can't control, certain insect infestations. Like there are all these factors that are out of your control. And I realized very quickly with gardening to keep my expectations loose. Um, Trial and error was the name of the game. And, like sow those seeds. And if they don't germinate in a couple weeks, sow more seeds. We're
Yeah,
not going to linger on it and lament what could have been. We're going to plant more seeds and see what will grow. And if those don't grow, go to the nursery and buy some little transplants you can put in there. But no, I think in terms of what it's taught me about writing in life, it's really ultimately to slow down, like slow down and look at your life and all of the things that are around you that get lost in the craziness when you're working and doing God knows what day to day. It really taught me to like pause, breathe, um, get in touch with nature and get in touch with yourself. Ultimately, get off that computer, get outside. Um, you have writer's block, go for a walk, sit in the sun, smell the flowers. Seriously.
And actually, I think this is a perfect little segue here into Felicia's question. I appreciate you opening up new dimensions. Do you have ideas for other worlds in your life?
Ooh, other worlds. That's such a funny question because I feel like I'm always teetering between worlds. Um, but the book has taught me about integration, like literally this cover, we have Flora growing out of a machine. And so I think there's something to that of like, yes, it could be one or the other, but there's also a way to bring these elements into your life and into your work. I would spend time in the garden when I knew that I should have been editing my book, and it made me feel guilty. And I would tell Angel, like, oh, I really should be working on my book instead of blah, blah, blah in the garden. And he would say, you are working on the book. This is all part of the book. And it's so true. Like, I couldn't have written it if I didn't devote that time to being in nature, to helping things grow and to be nourishing, um, not only the plants, but myself. Like, it's a very gratifying experience. And I think, um, like, I think if there was gonna be, like, a saga to this book or something, it would probably be a book about the garden, That would be the natural world. I would move into eco-poetics, not so much documentary poetics, but I've been thinking about that more and more of, what would it mean to be an eco-poet in these times?
That's a big question.
Yeah,
Can't answer that one tonight. That's a lofty.
that's a loaded question.
That's a lofty goal. But actually, since you just showed it off, it's featured in the background for you here tonight as well. So I do want to talk about the cover, right?
Mm.
Fantastic cover by Dave Mahan. And I just wanted to ask, a little bit about the process, what it was like for you, and the overall just vision of this cover in general. Because there are a lot of very specific flora in there. There's a lot of specific, things growing out of the tape recorder, and specifically why the tape recorder and all that sort of stuff. I think we have an idea, but I want to let you talk about that.
Yeah, well, as you know, MJ, the book cover was a bit of a process, but it was so worth it, in my opinion. I, for a long time, had this vague vision of flora and fauna growing out of a tape recorder, like for as long as I can remember. I wanted it to be vibrant. I didn't quite know what the other elements would look like yet, but all I knew was that I wanted this effect of like life taking over. And I'm so grateful to have worked with this on Dave, who is such an incredible artist and was so receptive to my ideas. Because initially it was going to be a very different thing, or at least the mock-up was very different. And I had very specific ideas, and colors. And he manifested it. He manifested the botanical noir that I wanted. That was the concept that I had come up with. And so I decided I want it to be a tape recorder. Not because I use a tape recorder in my job, because I actually don't. I don't know where it is right now, but it's a digital recorder. You know, we live in the 21st century. But when I was a kid, I had a tape recorder that I would bring with me almost everywhere. And as a teen, you know, would make angsty music on it and whatnot. It was a big part of my life, that tape recorder. And I think it kind of spoke to the poet and wallflower that I came to be in my life. And so I decided on the tape recorder, and I wanted it to be these specific flowers, which are the resurrection lily, Spanish lavender, pincushion, penstemon, and salvia, because that's what was growing in my garden and in my yard at the time of finishing this book. And there's even my hummingbird friend and my bee friend in there as well. Yeah. And actually, when I went outside yesterday with my book, because I wanted to take a cute picture, I could hear the hummingbird above me. And I was like, oh my God, if you could just pose with my book, that would be like perfect. But it meant a lot to just have her there, Honey the hummingbird.
Oh, that's so cute. I love
Yeah.
Oh
But
my
yeah, I'm so happy with this, especially with the black and white. Like, he really brought the noir in that I wanted as well. Shout out Dave Mahan.
Oh, he really always does a phenomenal job. So I only have one more question for you, Hannah. Okay, to bring us to a close this evening. You have gone through this entire pandemic without doing a single Zoom reading until tonight, this very moment. And so I just want to ask you, Hannah Kezema, you finished your first Zoom. How do you feel?
I feel great, especially because the power stayed on. I didn't even tell y'all that, like, we were supposed to get another storm today. So I've got my internet plugged into a little Jackery unit in case the power goes out. But the wind and rain stopped for us.
You dissolving and hit up in the mountains there near Santa Cruz. I just you were out power already for like 10 days, a couple
Don't
months.
move to the woods, everybody. It
Ah,
sounds glamorous and like the right thing to do, but just don't do it. Just
well, Anna, thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful book and this reading tonight. Thank you everybody for being here. Wonderful audience. I appreciate your questions as well. Please give a little more love for Hannah in the chat. But that's our show tonight, folks. That's it. It's a wrap. We did the thing. Hannah's gonna do a million more Zooms now.
Oh no.
So be on the lookout for all these big virtual events coming up. And that's it.
Love you guys.